All right, we are live. Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. Tonight we are on Motley Crew Chats episode 16 with the lovely Johanna Reeds. Johanna, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Yay, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on Motley Crew Chats. At the last minute, I changed into black because I realized we have an
Nice.
assassin theme going on
Yes,
the thumbnail.
dark. Yep, dark. Yep.
So.
I've gotten several comments on the thumbnail already, so that was a good theme. I'm glad we went with that.
That's great.
We've got a bunch of people in the chat already. Hello, everybody. Hi, Sarah. Sarah is currently making last minute fixes and lighting things to the cover for Bloodstones. So I'm very excited about that.
I can't wait to see that.
I'm so
I can't
excited.
wait to see that.
It's so good. I'm so excited.
She's such a talented artist too. So
agree. I'm very biased, but I completely agree.
No, she really, really is. As someone who's done digital art before. Yeah.
I would just put a book cover with some stick figures on it for my stories. So I'm very grateful that she's much more talented than me.
Very talented.
John. Hi, John. Philip Chase is in the house.
That's right.
Hi, Daniel.
Hello.
Always here to run chaos in the chat is Andrew's Wizardly Reads.
Of course.
Always.
Every time. Mm-hmm.
Hey, Brian. You know, that was one of my kind of guilty pleasure purchases quite a few years ago, is that pair of black graphite size. And that's still like one of my favorite possessions. I love them so much.
Oh,
they're so cool. And Evie. All right. So the first question that I have to ask you, because that is the canon question for all live streams, is what are you reading right now, Johanna?
I am reading A Song for Arbonne by Guy Gabriel Kay. If I'm saying the name right, Arbonne. I don't know. It's French.
No, I would have said something very Minnesotan like Arbonne.
So it works. It works. Yeah.
So because you've read some Guy Gabriel Kay now, like you've read Lions of Al-Rassan, I think. Have you read Tigana?
I haven't read Tigana yet. Okay. I've heard so many mixed feelings about Tigana recently.
Too. Yeah.
It's it's kind of surprising. But the Lions of Al-Rassan, I think you would love the Lions of Al-Rassan, Tori. It definitely has a Motley Crew kind of thing going on.
I mean,
for sure.
you know how to sell me on a book. It doesn't take much more than Motley Crew.
That's all I have to say.
Right?
Literally.
Well, I have had Tigana. I actually purchased that prior to even starting a booktube channel because I had heard it around the circles. And I got this, I have this super old falling apart mass market paperback of Tigana. And then I have Sailing to Sarantium, which a bunch of people read last year and really loved. But yeah, I haven't really decided on an entry point for Guy Gabriel Kay yet. So maybe I'll grab Lions as well.
Well, I know that Jenny Wirtz, who you had on Motley Crew Chats recently, I know she has claimed that The Lions of Al-Rassan is one of her favorite books of all time.
I mean, well, that does
favorite GGK book. Yeah. But that book specifically, I think, has Tori vibes. I think you would really love that book because, and I've noticed a similar theme in A Song for Arbonne, but it's different. I think A Song for Arbonne is actually perfect for me because it's all about troubadours and music. And for me, it's like, I just feel like it's tailor written.
Very bardcore.
Oh, big time. Yeah. Beautiful. I love it so much. But with the Lions of Al-Rassan, I specifically think that would be a Tori book because he likes to play on the idea of getting people from very different backgrounds, from different cultures, different religions, putting them together. And there's some banter, there's some back and forth, and then really bonding them. And he knows how to create a bond between characters. It's absolutely incredible. It's one of the best found family dynamics I've ever read.
See, this is the problem with having friends who are amazing at pitching books, that your TBR just screams silently in the background, and you're like, oh yeah, that one on Amazon right now.
Yeah, no, I really, really do think it's a Tori book. I really, really do.
I mean, I'm sold. I'm ready. Let's go. I'll buy it.
Yeah.
Brian loved Tigana. Andrew DNF'd Tigana. Philip loved Tigana. Jimmy says it was just okay. Speaking of mixed opinions on Tigana.
Yeah.
Evie wants to know if she will love Lions of Elrasan.
Oh, I think you would, Evie. I think you would love. I'm gonna gamble because with Evie and I have an interesting kind of thing with our tastes because we tend to love a lot of the same books, but I tend to be a little bit more high on books that she's a little more low on. I think that's
Okay.
usually the case. So sometimes if I love a book, she won't love it as much. I've noticed that being the case anyway. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
gone back and forth a little bit between me and her, but I think The Lions of Alrasan is a safe bet. I think you would love it,
Okay.
Evie. Yeah.
It's so true, Philip. We're all kids in the I was talking to John over at Talking Story last night. He did an interview with me for Phased, and we were talking a little bit about how, at least for me, I feel like I finally have this big circle of nerd friends that I always wanted when I was a kid. So we're all just kind of reliving that like nerd culture life from our childhoods, I think.
Oh, yes.
Love
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. It's the best possible problem. It really
It
is.
is. Oh no,
Yeah.
more great books to read. Whatever
I
will we
know.
do?
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
What are you
Andrew,
reading right now, by the way?
so I am actually about a third of the way into Jade War right now and loving it.
Oh, good. Yay.
Loving it. I loved Jade City. I had to kind of laugh because I was digging through some of your videos on your channel today. I went back and watched your first ever booktube video. And I found out that you love persimmons and the purple potatoes, which
Yep.
was exciting. Now I have to try both of those. And I had seen, was I somewhere you were talking about, oh, it was during the pacing? Jimmy was talking about Greenbone being faster paced than he normally, I think at some point during the pacing discussion, Greenbone came up and Jimmy was making the comment that it was like a little fast and kind of jumped around with the time jumps and stuff. And that made me laugh because I loved that pacing video because it just goes to show how differently we all perceive pacing, I think.
Yes.
Because to me, this is medium pacing. Like it's not as fast as something as like Red Rising, but it's definitely not slow. It clips along, but it's slower than a lot of my favorite stuff. So yeah, it was just interesting with that, the difference in perceptions.
It's such a perception thing. Pacing is especially a perception thing. I think more than 100%. Anything else. I mean, and I wanted to do that discussion for a few different reasons. And one is because I feel like I'm the worst at assessing what pacing is compared to the larger community. So I might think a book is really fast paced and everybody's like, wow, that was a slog. I'm like, really? Like the only one I could be,
go ahead.
like, the only one that I think I could be accurate in saying is Red Rising is super, super fast.
Yep.
Lord of the Rings is really slow.
On a scale of Red Rising to Lord of the Rings.
There you go. That's all I know.
Well, and I think too, one of the things that I thought of while you guys were talking about that is, to me, it also comes down to a personal investment because we all are invested in such different types of characters and themes and all of that. So if we're super invested in a story, it tends to clip along a lot faster versus, if we're not as invested, even Red Rising feels like a slog, so yeah.
Absolutely. No, that's 100% true. And I wanted to kind of dispel the misconception too that authors need to have a lot of action in order to make you invested. I think that can sometimes work against investment in a book sometimes. Oh, yay. Have you finished it?
No. I still have to read the last one, but I've read 3 of them. But you were talking about like not needing a lot of action to be super invested. And immediately I was like, oh, Long Price Quartet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because there is action in that third story, but it doesn't feel like that's the focus of the story at all. It feels like it's very focused on the characters.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that with Greenbone Saga, a theme that I'm finding in both of them is that kind of choices over a lifetime and how that impacts the next generation and the world at large. And there's a lot of that kind of generational theme and culture and heritage and in both of those that I think is really I'm very invested in, at least in both series. So
yeah, I love that too. I love when an author can play on generation and how things change over time.
Well, so that'll bring me to my first question. So before I told Johanna before we went live, but I reached out to a few people I had like an hour left until the interview, and I'm a very last minute person. So I sent a bunch of notes out to a bunch of people and said, hey guys, submit a question for Johanna. I'm not going to tell her who asked the question until she answers it, and then I'll tell you who asked it. And the first one fits into that quite perfectly. What defines a great read for both of us? And I think that kind of fits into the question I was going to ask you, which was, what are your favorite story elements? Like, what really pulls you into a book, and your favorite tropes, elements, etc., that really make it 5-star for you?
Oh, wow. That's such a good question. I feel like there are different things that I pay attention to. So one thing
Mm-hmm.
I could speak of that we just talked about, like friendships, found family, that dynamic. I've been trying to pay attention, and I would love to hear your perspective, especially as a writer and as someone who loves that found family trope. Like what makes friendship believable and what makes you
Mm-hmm.
invested in that as a reader. And something that I've been noticing in some of the books that I've been reading this last year is that not only is it important, of course, to have good established characters, like individual characters, but I really appreciate it when an author shows conflict in a friendship because
Mm-hmm.
I think that those are the moments that could be the biggest relationship builders. And I know for me and some of my friendships, like it's taken so much vulnerability for me to open up to somebody that I'm close to and being and saying, "Hey, do you not like me? Or did you not? I thought I heard you say this. Did you mean that?" Or to clarify something that because my brain does weird things sometimes and makes
Same.
misinterprets things. And
Yeah.
so, like when somebody can bring that forth in a story, or even just show characters who are friends, like, make fun of each other a little bit.
Yeah.
That was something I loved in even though the Witcher series, I read that entire series, all of the books published, and while I'm not super high on the series as a whole, that was one thing I really enjoyed about that series. I thought
Mm.
it still had very strong character work. The characters still stay with me, and the way the characters would tease, Geralt, for example, for being kind of, like, gruff and, like, "I'm so
Yeah.
serious," and they were like, "Ha, ha,
Stoic all the
ha."
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was funny because, Sapolsky, I think is that the name of the author? I can't remember. The author of The Witcher, anyhow, he did such a great job of establishing Geralt as a serious character for a long time,
Mhm.
and then after so many books, his friends around him, they just started poking fun at him, and they started making fun of him, and it was
Yep.
like it was just so perfect. So I love that dynamic between friendships when it can be playful, but also when it could be vulnerable, when there could be
Mhm.
conflict. So those kind of relationship dynamics, that's one thing. I mean, there are so many other things I can go into, but I'd
Yeah.
love to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, I agree. I think one of the things I always look for, especially in a found family or, close relationship or Motley Crew, any of those kind of fit into this. I like contrast. So I like it when you have the super stoic, because as humans we kind of instinctively seek a sort of balance, I think. And when we that's why that old saying, opposites attract. I think it's kind of a way of trying to find sort of balance between the two. And I love seeing that contrast in friendships. So, like, if you look at Lies of Locke Lamora, you have Locke, who's this very reckless, very impulsive leader, doesn't always think through, he kind of jumps before he thinks, sort of thing. And then you have Jean on the other side, who is this very nurturing, caring, cautious, mostly, kind of mature of the two of them figure. And I think that's such a beautiful part of their relationship, is that contrast to each other, where they not only balance out each other's strengths and weaknesses, but they can also challenge each other. When Jean sees Locke being immature, he calls him out on it, and that's one of my favorite parts of their relationship. So I totally agree with you, because real depth to friendships, the more things you work through together, the deeper and more long lasting your relationship can be, because it's, yep, we've been through that, we know we can get through it again or get through something else. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, and, like, I love the Locke and Shaw character because, like you said, they also have a playfulness to with each other too. There's, like,
Yes.
depth, and they go through some things together.
A few.
Yeah, without spoilers, but,
Yep.
yeah, it's such a beautiful dynamic. It's
It is.
fantastic. Lynch is a gifted writer.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
um Let me go back up because everybody's got some great comments in here. So Andrew has a question. So Andrew, on my channel, we play Kiss, Marry, Avoid, because I don't believe in that level of violence toward any author. Okay. But Johanna, if you would like to answer this question, you may.
I don't know if I can. Honestly, this is way too hard.
That's a stacked lineup.
Yeah, because at this point, my level of I can probably honestly say my level of investment is a bit higher in Martin and Erickson because I've read more books by them.
That makes sense.
And I reread all of the Song of Ice and Fire books this year, or at least the 5 books in the series. And I've read all the Malazan Book of the Fallen books, plus a couple of other ones in the world. So it's just I just feel like the level of investment is too high. I'm sorry. I'm such a coward.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
That's always it's the same as kind of a save one, drop one game, which I may or may not have prepared for us later.
Oh, nice. Okay.
I went through your Goodreads and a bunch of your videos and just pulled a bunch of favorite books and all stuck them in a jar together.
My Goodreads is not the best reflection if you looked at the older stuff, but you know.
I went through mostly your videos because that was a good resource.
But I would probably, even though I'm loving A Song for Our Bone, and that, I mean, it's going to be a favorite, I think. I think it's going to be a favorite. Just, I'm halfway through the book, and I'm loving it so much. I hope, as long as it keeps going the way it's going, and The Lions of Alrasan was an instant favorite. Nice. But at the same time, like I said, I think I would have to drop that author just because
you haven't read as much.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Pretty sure I remember Sanderson and Abercrombie both praised GGK as the best living fantasy author in the chat on Daniel's channel. I mean, when Sanderson and Abercrombie agree on a favorite author, they're very different sides of the genre, so that's pretty cool.
That was a really great interview. I was actually surprised. I was surprised they also had very positive things to say about George R.R. Martin too. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of surprising coming from Sanderson because his style is so different.
So different. Yeah. And it kind of makes you stop and go, Sanderson reads dark fantasy? What?
I know. Exactly. Which, by the way, I really loved your video on clean fantasy.
Oh, thank you.
Noble fantasy. Yeah. I thought that was a really smart topic because there are a lot of people, I think, who want to read adult fantasy, but they don't necessarily want to read. They want in-depth fantasy, but they don't necessarily want all the violence that's associated with it. They don't necessarily want that kind of experience. So to me, it kind of makes sense to, at least as a reviewer, be able to talk about that in that way.
Well, and I think, I think a lot of people assume that you have to relinquish the depth if you're going to lose all of that type of content, whether it's violence or, the sexuality side of things or any of that. And I think that that's not necessarily the case. And while Sanderson is definitely somebody I would recommend for a person who's looking for a clean adult fantasy, I feel like he's often the only modern author that a lot of people put forward. And so I wanted to give kind of, okay, well, here's a list of some other people that you could check out, from traditionally published classic authors all the way down to like debuts that were released in the last year that would fit this. Because I think you should never feel bad for wanting or not wanting like to read specific subgenres or content styles, and it should be for everybody.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
So speaking of that,
sure.
So you and I both read a lot of grimdark, dark fantasy style books, and that kind of leads me into on the kind of other end from clean fantasy. How do you feel reading a lot of these heavy topics that I feel like dark fantasy and grimdark tackle? Do you personally have sort of a line that's like, I don't like when certain things are portrayed a certain way, or where do you kind of have boundaries with that? Or do you do authors portray certain things in certain ways that will turn you off of a dark fantasy? And I'd love to hear more about that, because I know both of us read in that subgenre quite a bit.
Oh, that's such a good question. And it's funny because I tend to be somebody who's pretty stubborn about not DNFing books most of the time.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I've been rethinking that in my head lately. And just also wanting to encourage people that if they ever feel like their boundaries are being crossed, to feel free to DNF a book. So, for
Yeah.
example, I talk a lot about, you and I both talk a lot about Malazan Book of the Fallen. We're both huge
Mhm.
fans. And at the same time, there is some content in that series that I just don't think is appropriate for all people at all times, depending on what they're going
Absolutely.
through. And the last thing I'd want is for them to feel like they need to stick with it because, well, Johanna loved it. So I need,
Right.
so I feel like it's so important to honor personal boundaries when it comes to that. As for myself, I find I've been able to tolerate quite a bit more, I think, when it comes to books than I was actually thinking about this later today because I put out a video today about the most disturbing
Disturbing
books.
books,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, and and the funny thing about that, in that video title and stuff, I had a fun time making that video. And at the same time, I felt a little conflicted about it because I thought, well, that's not exactly like why I pick up a book. It's like, Joanna, you'll love this. It's disturbing. I'm like, that's not that's not why I picked up any of those
Time out.
books. Yeah, it's not the reason, but at the same time, I can appreciate that an author who is skilled in being able to elicit that experience
Right.
and to be able to bring attention to something through it, be able to like highlight a theme or whatever.
Mhm.
But but anyway, there was one book that did push me over, and I've always questioned it. And I did put this, I did talk about this in my DNF video about why I'm resistant to DNFing books, and that was Kushiel's Dart.
Ah,
And I
yep.
can't remember the name of the author of that series, but I tried the first book. I want to say like 12 years ago. It was after I read the A Song of Ice and Fire books the first time. And so at the time I thought, oh, I can handle a darker type of material. And this is kind of what I'm gravitating towards anyway. I kind of want this darker, epic
Yeah.
exploration. And I started that book, and I'm trying to think of how to talk about it without going into spoilers, but it did seem to have kind of like a sadomasochistic, I guess, kind of thing
Mm.
going on where, and it was part of the world building. And I just got thank you so much, Jimmy.
Thanks,
I got
Jimmy.
so uncomfortable with it after a while. Like I couldn't handle it. It was
Yeah.
disturbing me on a level that I don't think I've ever been disturbed before with a book.
Mhm.
And I DNF'd it. And the crazy thing about it is that I thought I'd never look back. But then there's a lot of people on BookTube who've talked
Mhm.
about that, like Chris's Bookish Cauldron. I know he is very high about that series and says that the world building what I've heard from a lot of people who love that book specifically, they say that it gets less like that as you go on and it becomes more political and that the writing is beautiful. So many wonderful things about that series
Yeah.
and that book. So I've always wondered if maybe I DNF'd it prematurely, but for me it hit a limit that I just couldn't deny. I couldn't take it.
Yeah. Do you think, like, for you, does there on BookTube we kind of have this running joke about, oh, just read until book whatever in the series
Mm.
and then you'll love it, or do you find yourself kind of being turned off by that idea if people say, oh, it gets great but you have to read all of this part of it first, whether it's a book or a series?
Yeah, and it's a really hard one too because because I've definitely had the experience before where like reading on did get me invested, but
Mm-hmm.
I also feel bad when I see people being miserable with like a book one, for
Yeah.
example, and other people saying, "Oh, just read on." It's like, for example, when I've seen people like really miserable with Gardens of the Moon, or
Yeah.
really miserable with, especially if they're miserable with both Gardens of the Moon and Dead House Gates, like the first two books in the Malazan Book of the Fallen
Yeah.
series, and then everybody's like, "No, you just read through book three." I'm like, "No, if you hated both books one and two, you
Yep.
can quit."
Yep.
You're not gonna like change your mind, I think at that point. So
Totally
yeah, I
agree.
think that's sometimes doing a person a disservice. What I say is that if it is a series, like let's say First Law or Malazan or something where it does seem to pick up momentum when it goes on, I think some good advice would be like just sit for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And if it, give it a month or two, give it a few months. And if that series calls to you again, if you feel like an itch to pick it up again, then maybe give it a shot. But
Yep.
if not, then let it go.
Yeah. Yeah, and there, I think as you get to know yourself as a reader more, it becomes very clear. Like you and I probably are at a point where, based on what I know of certain series, I know that it's not going to be for me. And that's okay. Like, part of that's just getting to know yourself as a reader and knowing what works and what doesn't. And I definitely think that there are some series that won't work for me, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you feel like there's any really popular series that probably is not going to be on your TBR just based on what you know about it?
That's a good question. I don't know. I never say never, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm just not sure, and then somebody's gonna prove me wrong, and I always prove myself wrong. I'm not sure if Faithful and the Fallen would
Okay.
be my thing. I'm just
Yep.
not sure, just from what I've heard about it. And another one I could say is Wheel of Time. I think Wheel of Time is probably the number one that I just haven't heard, with the exception of maybe one person I talked to recently. I haven't heard enough compelling reasons why I would enjoy that series or
Well,
what
and
about
that's a
it.
long series to commit to,
It
too.
is. Yeah, yeah, and it seems like the people I know who love the series, a lot of it is based on nostalgia, which is fair. I have a
Fair.
lot of
Yep.
series like that for me too.
Same.
Um, but I just don't know that Wheel of Time would be for me.
Yeah.
What about
That's
you? Does that series interest you?
Nope. And I feel bad. And again, like you, I have so many friends who absolutely love it. But that nostalgic, that for a lot of them, that was their gateway into fantasy. And yeah, that's going to be like a major pillar of your reading life then, which is really cool. I think if I had read it earlier on in my journey into fantasy, that would have been a better time for me to read it. I think now I would I'm really proud of myself. I am getting better at slow burn books and series, and I'm actually I love that I'm loving Long Price Quartet so much. I'm so happy about that. But I think that one would be too slow burn even for me.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know if I wonder about that too. I do think my taste has changed in that direction as well, and
Mm-hmm.
I always joke with Alan about the fact that, like, I saw that in Barnes& and Noble. I saw that bind up in Barnes& and Noble when it was
Mm-hmm.
available so many years ago, and I picked it up. This was before I knew about BookTube. I picked it up and put it back so many times, and it kept calling to me, and then I put it back, and I've
Mm-hmm.
always regretted it because now it's really hard to find. I'm very lucky to have one. Thank you, Evie. Um, but at the same time, if I had picked it up back then, I'm not sure. It's hard for me to know, but I'm not
Yeah.
sure if it would have spoken to me the same way as it does now.
Kind of a coulda, woulda, shoulda
Yeah,
situation.
it's hard to know. It's hard to know. I'm always
Um,
wondering about that, how our tastes change over
Same.
time.
Well, and so funny you should mention that, because another question that I got.
No, yeah.
First of all, the first question that we got about what defines a great read for both of us was from Janny Wirtz. So thank you, Janny, for submitting that. And then there was another question comparing how you read and approach books now to when you first started your channel. Have you noticed any significant changes to your approach to reading? If so, which are some of the most noticeable?
The changes to my approach to reading over time? That's the question?
Since starting BookTube was
Oh, since
specifically,
starting
but we could,
BookTube specifically.
but we could kind of do both.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting because when I started my channel, I think I was going through a very pivotal time in my reading taste changing because it's kind of a weird journey. So I fell in love with fantasy with Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit when I was a
Mm-hmm.
teenager, even though I didn't finish Lord of the Rings famously back then. I finished it a couple years ago. So it's never too late, Tori. It's never too late.
I promise. I
I
promise
know
it'll
your
happen
story with
someday.
that. Yeah, it's never too late. But I went through so many phases where I just wasn't actively reading fiction. And
Mm-hmm.
then I really fell back in love with fantasy with A Song of Ice and Fire. That was what really tipped me
Yeah.
over. I loved it so much. And then got into a whole bunch of classic sci-fi after that. Then I took another long, long break from reading for various reasons. And when I got back into it again, it was really tough because I just didn't know what my reading taste was, and I guess that was
Yeah.
around the time that I found out about BookTube. Actually, I found out about the Witcher series, and because my husband bought the first book because he was playing the video game, and so
Sure.
I just ended up reading all the Witcher books back to back. Probably the last series I binged since
Nice.
since BookTube.
It's a little
And
harder to
then
do that now.
it is, it
Yeah.
is. But then, like, trying to find out what to read, because of the way the YouTube algorithm worked for me back then, I was finding a lot of channels that focused on YA fantasy, so that was mostly what I was reading, a lot of
Mhm.
YA fantasy and then some modern fantasy. And then towards the end of 2020, and I started to find more community and more this circle of BookTube that we're in,
Mhm.
and that's when I started getting into a lot of the popular new releases, like the Poppy War trilogy and the Rage of Dragons series,
Mhm.
books 1 and 2. And I read Jade City. I can't remember some of the other ones, but I started getting into a lot of the more popular stuff. And I went through a period of time right before starting my channel, and I was binging a whole lot of Sanderson too.
Yep.
But I went through a period right before I started my channel where I read so many new releases back to back. Like if it was a new release, I was on it. New release,
Mhm.
new release, new release, because it was a new release and I was hyped and I was feeling the hype wave. And I ended up just feeling very mid about every single
Mm.
one. I don't know if it was just a time in my life or what it was,
Yeah.
but it just wasn't hitting for me. And that was also when I started getting really deep into Malazan, like when I started really committing into that journey. And then I started my channel. And so it's weird because when I started my channel, I did hop on some new things, but I feel like I did make it an intention for the most part to try to stick to things I was pretty sure I would like.
Yeah.
And I stuck to fantasy, which I was reading a lot less fantasy, not as much fantasy, or I had more of a balance before starting a channel. Sorry, this is a very long-winded answer to your
Go
question.
for it. You are the guest. The floor is yours.
Yeah. But I think it's just something that I've been, like, kind of trying to, identify more about my reading taste. There are a lot of different things that have shifted for me or that I've noticed that I appreciate in stories, in addition to what we talked about.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just been a learning journey. It's been a learning journey, and I think the beauty of having a YouTube channel is that because you're in front of a camera and you're having to articulate your thoughts on certain books, you grow to learn what those specific things are in a book that are working for you and what isn't and why. And I think it
Mhm.
was a lot easier to disregard those specifics before I started a channel. So I think YouTube actually has helped me. I think having this channel has actually really helped me to hone in on what I love.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think it's important to be able to articulate, what it is that you like and dislike about stories. And I feel like BookTube has made me, even within the genre of fantasy, more open-minded in terms of what styles of stories I will pick up and enjoy. Because when I first started my channel, I, like you, came from kind of a YA fantasy algorithm and tried really hard. I really tried hard in
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
in that circle, and it was just not that was not my crowd. And then I had gatewayed into fantasy with Gardens of the Moon and Dead House and Memories of Ice, Malazan and Mistborn, and there's a trilogy by Karen Miller called The Hammer of God, um, that I read like 11 years ago, I think. And those three series could not be more different from each other, but I didn't really I wasn't able to articulate why they were different and what I liked about one and then what I liked about the other one and what I didn't like as much about, so it being able to articulate and also seeing the appreciation of the people that I'm around on a regular basis makes me want to give more different styles of books a chance. And I keep going back to this, but it's a great example. I would not have been ready to read Long Price Quartet even a year and a half to 2 years ago. I wasn't ready for it. And now I'm absolutely loving it. And I'm shocking myself that I'm loving it because it is a very slow, intimate character study, basically. And I love that about it. But 2 years ago, I would have been bored by it. I need things to happen, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Um, and so I like that I can say, I love Red Rising and I also love Long Price Quartet, that I have more of a variety in that now.
Yeah. Yeah, you start to learn to appreciate different things
Mm,
as a reader, and I think that's beautiful. Yeah, it makes
absolutely,
you think
Gary.
about things, and there's something really rewarding about thinking about reading.
Yeah.
Sounds so nerdy, but it's
Yeah.
true.
Well, it's like you're exercising your brain about, deeper topics on a regular basis. And I think that's really healthy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Zin makes the comment, Long Price Quartet is far slower than Wheel of Time. And Daniel says, but
Wow.
it takes a lot longer to read it. That is the nice thing about Long Price Quartet is I feel like if these were 500-page books or 800-page books, I definitely would not have enjoyed it as much as I did.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so strange because for me, it didn't read as slowly, I think, as
Mm,
most people say it does. But again, it could be like when I'm just like you said, like when it comes to pacing, we're just attending to different things.
mm-hmm.
Something else that I love in books and that I think Daniel Abraham does really well in that book is the way that he brings the setting to life. And he does it in such a
Mm-hmm.
light way. His
Yeah,
atmosphere is not ever heavy. There's
no,
like an effervescent feeling to the atmosphere, but I feel like I'm in like a feudal Japan type of world. And
100%.
that was beautiful to me. I loved that.
Yeah. It all balances so beautifully together. The plot with the characters and the setting and the magic system, all of it just seems to meet this very fragile but perfect balance. And I love that about it. It feels
Oh,
like it
yeah.
could topple one direction at any time, but it never does.
Yes. Oh, that's so well said. I totally agree with it. It's very, very cohesive in that way, right?
Yeah,
Like it cohesively blends that, like you said, because the magic in that world is really illustrating aspects of the characters themselves, like shadow aspects of their
right.
characterization, and them having to confront that, but then also working together and having their own dynamics and relationships in the world over time with all these political things happening in the background, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just it works really well.
but none of it's really hard to follow, which is also
Mhm.
a skill as a
Yeah.
writer. Like I'm constantly blown away by how well he's weaving everything together, and there's so many different pieces, but I'm not feeling like I'm being left behind in the explanation of it.
Yes. That's yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think he also approaches theme in a way that I appreciate too, because I don't think the themes are totally hidden. I think they're
No.
pretty yeah, they're pretty prevalent, but they linger like questions. And
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that as well because it kind of leads you on.
Yes, absolutely. Grufe says, Booktube is frankly doing what high school English failed to do for me, having so many different views and nuances and leaving me to think about all of it for myself. It's a
I
good
totally
point.
agree with that. I did have one good English class in high school. The other English classes I had were a joke, but I had one good English class. But the sad thing was, it felt like just the teacher and I going back and forth about Frankenstein or whatever we were talking about, and my other classmates were just kind of like falling asleep. So
Mm-hmm. We're here because we have to be.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Dairy, something I've learned is that a balanced story is great, but it's just as great when an author really leans into one aspect of a story. I think both of those are very impressive skill sets, either or.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that comes down to the author knowing their strengths as a writer and being able to hone in on that. What about
Yeah.
you as a writer, Tori? Do you find that you like when you're writing a story? I know that we both have talked about themes quite a bit, that that's something
Yeah.
that's important to us. Do you find yourself is theme something at the forefront of your mind when you're writing, or is that something that comes secondarily as you let the story emerge?
I think the themes tend to be a little bit more part of the intuitive flow of the story for me, where I kind of start with character
Mhm.
usually, and then when in digging into the characters and getting to know them as well as I need to write the story, the themes kind of sort of start to surface. What the more you dig into the character, you start figuring out what they're afraid of, what matters to them, what they want, and how what obstacles lie in their path to getting to that goal. And the themes start to surface because you start to notice patterns.
Yeah.
And I'm a big parallels geek. I love parallels in books. So I love to see parallel characters where they both come from similar paths and take very different directions, or kind of mirror characters where they're on two opposite sides of a war or something, but they're very similar. And I love that kind of stuff. Um, So I don't know if that really answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah. And I think that could be a really fun way to explore theme too, is like, how does it work in this situation with this character making a totally
Yep.
different choice? So
Makes
I
it
love that
it makes
too.
it very personal, I think. The themes
Hmm.
become very personal when they're tied so heavily to one character's life and then also to another character's life, and then they kind of meet and you have this overarching theme across multiple characters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Funny that AP should show up, because the question I just asked you about comparing from the start of BookTube to now and how your reading taste has changed was AP's question.
Ah, and AP, I feel like I need to credit him more about this because his video on satellites and kernels, I told
Mm,
him this many times. I feel like that kind of shifted my whole entire approach to reading, honestly. So I'm going to get it wrong. I always get it backwards. I think the kernels are and AP can correct me if I'm wrong, are sort of like the bigger beat event kind of
yep.
things that happen in the story. And the satellites are the things in between, like the space
Mm,
in between where we're
yeah.
developing things and
Yeah.
we're just learning to appreciate the satellites more. That
Yeah.
was something I think that shifted for me over time. I think we're both kind of talking about that in a way.
Absolutely. Well, and I
Mhm.
think that's something that I see in a lot of um, I'm tapped into a community where I get to see a lot of very new authors that are putting out their first books and their first stories. And I love that, because I love seeing this fresh take on genres that we all love. And one of the things that I do notice about a lot of early writing people that are very early on learning their writing process and craft is that that's often missing. There's that moments of normalcy and those moments to just sit with the themes or the characters aren't as leaned into oftentimes, which is fine, because you have to like learn how, because it's a very delicate balance to learn how to have both of those and get the same depth out of both of those types of moments. But yeah, it's those moments of normalcy for me are really where you fall in love with characters, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like yeah, a critical dragon explained there about kernels, the things that
Kernels are
cannot remove.
have the
Have the narrative
nerves.
still function? The satellites could be removed without the plot failing. Yes, and see, I really
Yep.
appreciate that because a lot of times on BookTube, I hear people saying, this could have like you could trim the fat on this
Yep.
story, or and I'm like,
Yep.
no, I love that. I love the fat. Leave it
Yeah,
on.
exactly. Leave it
I'm
there.
usually the one. I'm usually the one kind of fighting for the fat uh, that
Same.
people want to trim. So I guess I just appreciate that. It helped me appreciate a lot of stories in a different way.
Mhm.
And Philip being in the chat too, I think Philip also helped me to appreciate the function of a flat character. And I didn't realize until talking with Philip that I appreciate a lot of flat characters because I used to think every character has to be super well realized and it has to have this very in-depth psychology. And I love that. I love the psychological journey of a character and I
Same.
love those kind of dynamics. But then when I started thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, but sometimes having a good flat character in a story, it can really work. And
Mhm.
even like today when I was thinking about the video I put out on the disturbing books that I read, there was the manga Uzumaki. The characters in
Mhm.
that manga I would describe as very flat, but
Mhm.
that actually, and I was explaining to somebody in the comment section, I feel like the flat characters in that manga brings forth like the absurdity and the
Yeah.
horror. It brings it more to the front. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like your focal point in a picture or drawing. It brings out things when you focus on different things. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. Lantern. Tori might like a lot of ancient African story structure. Novels have adapted it, but it's entirely about stories looping back on themselves. Parallels are rare. It's funny because I haven't gotten into a lot of African storytelling yet. I would like to. One of my favorite poets of all time is writes in a lot of from that background, and just incredibly brilliant poet. His name is Yusuf Komunyakaa, and I was able to actually hear him do a reading of one of his poetry books back when I was in college, and just hearing him in person reading these incredible books about warfare and fatherhood and love. And I mean, they're just absolutely incredible.
fascinating.
It
That's
was
really
very
cool.
cool. Listening to
It's
poetry in person is very cool. If you ever have the experience or ever have the opportunity to do that, you should.
Yeah, I have done that I have done that before, but it's been so many years, and there really is something special about it. I think that's probably the best way to experience poetry.
Absolutely. Yes, Philip knows him. That's awesome. Which do you know which compilation that's or collection that's from, Philip? I have read Neon Vernacular and War Horses by him. War Horses is the one I usually recommend to people, but okay. So also, you had a video on your channel that books that you love but don't recommend to everyone. And I was wondering, what are some of the books that you feel like that you love that you can recommend to the most people?
Oh, I was wondering about this recently because I feel like I'm almost the worst fan in a way because I'm always like, I love this book, but just don't read it because I don't think you'd like it, you know?
Yep, same.
um, Gosh, that's hard because at one point in time I would have said Dune and
Mm,
like reading reviews from a lot of readers this last decade, I realized that book might not have aged well for a lot of readers. Like
yeah.
maybe it spoke to a certain generation and maybe it's not as much for this current generation. So that's kind of the hard part about this is because we're constantly changing. Um, Dang, and I have to think about this. And then I would have said Lord of the Rings at one point in time. But there are a lot of people nowadays who say the movies are better or prefer the movies. I don't think that. I prefer the books, but I can't argue with what people like. Um, Let me think. Let me think.
Well,
Uh,
you've got some support for Dune. That's another
yeah.
one that I feel like I want to read that in 2024. And I feel like I'm at a point where I'm really going to appreciate it more now than I would have again like a year or two ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved it. And that's the one actually where I had a discussion with Philip on my channel with Philip and Mike from Mike's Book Reviews and Sarah from Sarah Reads. And that was the discussion actually where Philip was talking about how the characters are a bit flat, which
Mm-hmm.
surprises me because I got so attached to them. I got really, really attached to those characters and I never thought of them as flat. But then when he talked about it, I'm like, well, I guess I see how that's the case. I could see how they're flat or considered flat. But they serve the story so well because of the ideas, because of the themes that Herbert is exploring. But yeah, I love Dune, and I especially love it paired with books 2 and 3. So with Dune
Mm,
Messiah and Children of Dune, I feel like it creates a really strong arc, in my opinion. But yeah, I
yeah.
love that book.
Yeah, I was told by a couple of other friends that I know that are really big Dune fans that I have to at least read through Dune Messiah. Like if I've read the first one, that I have to read the second one so that I get the full, more of a
Yeah.
full picture of it.
Well, Dune Messiah is actually considered, and I think he intended it this way. It's a bridge book between books 1 and 3.
Okay,
So
so
I
I have
think,
to read all three.
yeah, I would
Okay,
recommend it. You don't have
yeah.
to, but Dune Messiah will give you a. It's a neat series in a way to think of it as a 3 book series, and I haven't read beyond that because you get one. It's all there in Dune. Like everything that Herbert is trying to do is in Dune, but you have to kind of be a careful reader, I think, to kind of catch what he's doing. And then when you read Dune Messiah, you really get what he's doing. It's like really obvious at that point.
Yeah,
And
I'm
then
gonna
you
need
read,
that.
yeah. I did. I don't, I did, I definitely didn't catch it the first time I read Dune.
Okay, well then I won't feel as bad.
Mhm.
I definitely have a harder time catching details. If there's details that an author is kind of subtly weaving into the plot, usually I'm the person that everybody's talking about the series and like, oh, did you know that this person and this person are the same person? And I'm like, they are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I
I'm like that
appreciate.
too. I'm usually so gullible and I don't catch anything. I always consider myself like not a plot-driven reader in the sense that I just don't predict things usually and I
Mhm.
don't find those details. That said, Guy Gabriel Kay right now is making me feel like the smartest reader in the world because he's been planting so many little tiny details, like tiny details, and I catch them. I've been catching so many of them and then he's explained them or brought them to light like a chapter later. I'm like, "Yep, I caught that. Yep, I caught that. Yep, I caught that."
And then you feel
So,
so good about yourself and you're
feel
just like,
so
yes.
yes, until I feel dumb the next book I read. But yes.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. That's something that as a reader I struggle with a lot is, and I haven't really found that with any of the most of the fantasy books that I've read. I'm okay not knowing certain things because I don't feel like the author is intentionally keeping me in the dark. You know, it's not like a trying to make me look stupid.
I'm the same
um,
way. Yeah.
except for, so my husband is a big fan of Gene Wolfe, and
Hmm.
he is an author that I absolutely cannot do. Like I can't with Gene Wolfe.
Have you tried?
I have, yes. I have
Oh,
read a Gene Wolfe book, and I will have to be probably paid to read another one just because I love listening to people talk about them, and I think for me that's the way that I enjoy his stories, is hearing other people discussing them, because the
mhm.
actual books are really hard for me to get through. I don't really get anything out of them, which is probably a me problem for sure, but
Yeah.
that's another one. Hot take.
Yeah. Oh, I think most people could enjoy, I'm not saying it would be a favorite for anybody by any means, but I think most people could enjoy Legends and Lattes. Have you read that
Oh,
one?
I haven't yet, but I want to.
Yeah, I think that that's an easy one to enjoy, you know?
Yeah, appeals to a pretty wide range of readers for
I
sure.
think so. I think
Yeah.
so.
Anansi Boys is on my mass market paperback shelf, so it will happen eventually.
I DNF'd that book when I was
Did you
DNFing like
really?
crazy. Yeah. I went through a phase and I went through a phase where I couldn't stop DNFing books. It was bad. But
Mm,
that particular book, I remember I started it and I found and I just didn't give it enough of a chance. So I'm sure it's good. I'm sure it's good. I just found the character seemed really depressed at the beginning. And one thing I've
mm,
noticed about myself when it comes to reading is that this is such a subjective obviously this is obviously a very subjective thing, but I really appreciate mental health explorations in books. However, I find it helpful if they don't start out depressed. If
ah,
we get there, then I'm in. But
have
if we start out kind of mopey, it's hard, and I just didn't give enough of a chance.
have you
I
read
was
Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman?
I haven't, no.
If you, it's great, but if you do, bless his heart, Richard Mayhew is our protagonist in that book, and he is like, the first lines of the book are just him. He's just having a bad day and he's upset about it and he's pouting.
Oh,
Like,
no.
but
Yeah.
book is excellent. But yeah, Richard is actually, though, with that one, there was a drama, an audio drama that was done of that with some pretty big names. I think Natalie Dormer is in it. James McAvoy plays Richard, and I that was the first. I was like, wow, this I can handle this version of Richard. It's he did a great job just making his character, I think, a little bit more vibrant than I felt he was on in the book. Um, Benedict Cumberbatch voices a character in there. There's a lot of big names in it, and it's very good.
Wow.
So
That's cool. Yeah, I think there are a lot of really good, audiobook productions of Neil Gaiman's books, so I'll have to
yeah,
check that out.
yeah, it's very good.
Yeah.
ZK says, when I think of Legends and Lattes, I think of everyone in the story freaking out over cinnamon rolls.
It's funny because 'cause I'm not even really a big fan of food in books. Like, even in A Song of Ice and
Johanna.
Fire I know, in A Song of Ice and Fire, Martin will go off for, like, several paragraphs on food descriptions, and I'm like, "Okay, okay." That's, like, maybe my one criticism of A Song of Ice and Fire. It's like, I'm okay.
I feel like you not liking food and fantasy, or not caring about food and fantasy books, might be your biggest hot take
It
yet.
probably
I think
is.
it is.
But I did like it in Legends and Lattes. For whatever reason, I loved it in that particular book. Like, I got such a kick out of it.
Do you feel like cozy fantasy is something that is that something that you finding you've enjoyed outside of that one, or was that just kind of a
That's such a good question. I think that that book was in some ways, meant for me to love because it's
mm,
the blend of coffee. I've noticed if something has coffee in the title or on the cover, usually I'm gonna love it, which is funny because The Sunset Limited by McCarthy has a coffee cup on the cover. It's not a cozy book, but it has a coffee cup on the cover, a cup of coffee on the cover. And, I really enjoyed and this is, like, kind of a TikTok darling, if you will, and probably super unpopular in this corner of BookTube, but I really enjoyed, Before the Coffee Gets Cold. which is,
Mm.
yeah, it's like a magical realism book that's set in a Japanese cafe, but
Oh, fun.
I just love Japanese culture too in books.
So do I.
So I liked the magical realism and the time travel part of it. It's a little bittersweet, and I just love that. So that's kind of cozy in a way, even
Yeah.
though it had some bittersweet moments and some, touching moments. I kind of think that's a cozy read. So I guess some books, but I tried Nettle and Bone by T. King Fisher as a palate cleanser a couple years ago, and I got so bored. And I'm like, how am I so bored with like this really short novella that's supposed, I don't know. I could see good things about it, but yeah, it's not a genre I normally gravitate towards.
Yeah. I think it's hilarious that within a very brief discussion there of cozy fantasy, Cormac McCarthy was mentioned.
I know, right?
That's probably the first time ever.
I know. It just makes no sense.
um, where was that? Brian, Legends and Lattes is excellent. So is Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. I think you just said you love him. I hear what I want. And then Philip, you might be hearing an unreliable narrator. I have a.
That's funny because there is an unreliable narrator in
We
Book of
are
the New
we are
Sun.
all unreliable narrators, in my opinion.
That's good. Oh, yay, another Before the Coffee Gets Cold fan.
Yeah, I'm trying to make sure I catch up on
Perfect.
all these. Oh, there we go.
Yay. I love that book.
I'll have to check it out. I noticed it was funny because my last book haul, I realized that the book stack was full of much shorter books than I normally get. And I have recognized that I think once I get through some of the chunks that I'm working on right now, which I'm loving, and I'm not afraid of a chunk, as many of us aren't, but I've really been feeling some short reads lately.
Yeah.
Like I want to just sit down for a week and read nothing but short books.
Same here. I just finished a short one the other day. What did I finish? Now I'm trying to remember. I read 2 short books. I read, Babel 17 by
Hmm,
Delaney, which is a
okay.
sci-fi book, and I loved it. I thought it was so awesome. So interesting. It explores language in a very unique
Mm.
way, and it has this really fun, quirky, world building. It does have a ragtag group of friends or a motley crew on a ship,
We'll
and
love it.
explores, yeah, and it's really short, but it was a fun read. I really enjoyed that. And it was very
Nice.
touching at times as well. But
Oh.
I also read, a short book by Tad Williams that's probably I've never heard anybody talk about it. It's called Caliban's Hour, and I imagine it's probably not his best work, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun, and it was based on The Tempest by
Yeah.
Shakespeare, so I went ahead and watched The Tempest over the weekend
Okay.
just to familiarize myself with, Shakespeare The Tempest so I could have a better connection to the story. And
Yeah,
yeah, so, like, short books, they can have their place. I think it's a wonderful
absolutely.
thing. Yeah.
I actually really like that. A lot of, especially, I'm noticing it with a lot of indie authors now too, that there's a lot of people going back to novellas in between or at the beginning of series. And I really like that because it gives you a chance to kind of taste test an author's
Mhm.
work a little bit, I think. Or even the world, if they have a novella at the beginning of the world that happens before book one, you can kind of get a little bit of a taste test. And that's kind of a nice, um, easy read to give you a little idea of what you're in for.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. And that's why I picked up that book because I would love to read Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn at some point,
Mm,
Williams.
same.
I have a feeling it's gonna be a favorite for me. I just have a feeling from everything I've heard about it. It sounds like it's appealing to A Song of Ice and Fire fans, so I'm like, "Yep, I think I'll enjoy that one," but I just don't have the time investment right now, and
Yeah.
I really so just to get a taste of Tad Williams's writing, even though it's probably early Tad Williams and not the best, I still really enjoyed it, so it was a good way to do that.
Yeah. I think, how do you balance your time when you're figuring out what you're going to read? Because, like you said, we talked a little bit about this earlier. It is harder to, when you get into a series, it's harder to just binge through it when you have a channel and you're parts of lots of discussions and read alongs. So, do you struggle with feeling like you can't get to everything you want to? And how do you decide what you're going to prioritize?
Yeah, so I think that that was the one benefit to the situation I was talking about earlier, pre-BookTube, when I was
Mhm.
jumping on every new release and then getting having very mid feelings about every book I was picking up and realizing just because something's new and shiny doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean it's gonna be for me.
Right.
And I know that there's a lot of pressure when you have a channel to be relevant, to be on top of things, to know about the newest series or the newest books that are out. I started looking at channels who have been around a while, like our friend Murphy, for example,
Mhm.
and I saw her reading series. I can't even think of an example right now. Well, she's reading Discworld right now. Let's say
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
But, she's taken her time. She's had a channel for 7 years, and she's taken her time picking up certain series. Like, it's not a big deal that she didn't pick it up her first year as having a channel, and I've
yeah,
thought about that. I'm like, if we're here for a while, it's gonna be just as meaningful to anybody if we pick up, whatever, Greenbone Saga, whatever it is,
yeah,
5 years from now as right now, so what's the rush? So what
yeah,
I've decided to do is just to prioritize a few series at a time, and part of that also came as a result of investing myself in Malaz and Book of the Fallen because
yeah.
prior to BookTube, I had read I kinda had a similar journey to you. I started book 1, and then I took a few months before picking up book 2, um, and then after book 2, I waited a long time before picking up the 3rd book to the
Mhm.
point where I even messaged Philip. This was before I had a channel. I even commented on his video. I said, I want to continue the series, but I'm wondering if I should just go back and start over again because it's a dense series and it's been a long time now since I read books 1 and 2. And he actually gave me the advice, I think you should just keep going. And I'm like,
Yeah,
okay, I will. So I did. And then once I started going, that was when I started a channel. And I realized these books are taking me a long time to read because I'm a very slow reader. And I actually made it my priority. At some point, I just decided it's going to be my priority to finish Malaz and Book of the Fallen this year. And I ended up letting go of a lot of other commitments, but finishing that 10-book series was one of the most rewarding experiences of my entire reading life. And I
yeah,
think that because I had that high of among highs of the ending of that series, it motivated me to want to just be a completionist, but
yeah.
also within my own boundaries, within my own time frame. So I do try to not put too much space between books. That's my
Mhm.
thing. I try really hard not to put too much space between books. And I also try to not to have too many series going on at the same time. And I've
Yeah.
also found that um, read-alongs can help with that, just depending on the combination of people you're with. So, like, I'm reading right now The Wars of Light and Shadow, by
Mhm.
Jenny Wirtz with AP and Philip, and that's been going great because I feel like we're kind of just moving at a very nice, even pace. Like, we're not
Mhm.
there's not a lot of pressure or rushing, but
Yeah.
we're just enjoying our time with the series as we're slowly moving through it. And I feel like just relaxing a little bit is such a good thing
Yeah.
to do, you
It
know?
is, especially in, when we're content creators and there can be a lot of pressure to, put out a certain amount of videos or read a certain amount of series. I think learning to establish your own boundaries with that is so important.
Oh, yes, absolutely. That's why I loved your, video about TBRs, like, while you're done with
Oh, thank you.
TBRs. Yeah,
Yeah. Yes.
yeah. And I really don't think I'm sure you received a lot of support for that,
I
right?
did. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Which was nice because it was one of those things where I realized that I was just kind of, I mean, there's always going to be books like even now looking into November. Do I have a TBR of sorts? Well, yeah, but I'm not making it a public statement anymore. And I'm not trying to, okay, for November, here's the books I'm reading because I was noticing I felt like there wasn't any space for me to change my mind or pick up a spontaneous read and then I was frantically trying to get all my books done by the end of the month, and that was not good.
No, I can't live with that kind of pressure on my reading
Mm-mm.
life,
Nope.
Yeah,
I
that's
couldn't either.
wonderful, and I think that's an important thing to understand is, like, maybe you said that you talked about you felt the pressure to kind of put this
Yeah.
stuff out there.
Hmm.
And yet, when you said that you were done with TBRs, how much
Yeah.
support you received. Just
Everybody was great.
realizing yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's
And
kind of
that's
imagined in our heads a little bit.
100%. And I would say 95% of the pressure I feel as a content creator is me putting it on myself for
Yeah.
sure. And there's always, everybody gets so excited and wants you to read their favorite series. And it's so hard because I genuinely want to get to all the books and you have to somewhat be realistic in knowing, well, I can't physically read all the books at the same time. So I have to prioritize, and how, making sure that I'm leaving space for me to have my own experiences with series at the same time.
Yes. Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Do you feel like as a result of like the cramming pressure that you had before, did you find yourself experiencing any reading slumps as a result? Yeah.
Yep. I would say May to June. Um, I definitely had some reading slump issues. Um, and I kind of, like you were talking about before, I was bouncing from book to book to book. I'd read like a chapter of a book and I just put it down, and I'd try a chapter of a different book and I put it down, and I just wasn't really sinking into anything.
Hmm.
And I think what I've found for myself when I get into a slump moment is it's a good time for me to remind myself what I love about reading. And usually for me, that looks like a reread of picking up White Fang by Jack London, or reading Red Rising, the first book again, or something that I know isn't going to take me a super long amount of time, but is something that I know for sure this is just a comfort read. It's going to give me, all of the nostalgic feels that I want, and it's going to reconnect me with reading.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
yeah,
This has, like, been my year of the reread.
love
In
it.
fact, I've been joking to myself, I'm like, "I need to stop rereading." I have reread so many books this year. It's not even been a conscious thing except for the A Song of Ice and Fire books.
Yeah.
It's not been a conscious thing, but I keep on rereading books, and I'm like, "What's wrong with me?" But it's so important to
Yeah.
give yourself that space. I feel like there is a lot of emphasis, and it's almost like a hidden curriculum thing. Have you ever heard of hidden curriculum?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if anybody's listening and doesn't know what that is, it's kinda like the unspoken rules in education.
Mm-hmm.
The lessons we take from things that are not explicitly stated,
Yeah.
and I feel like there can be a bit of a hidden curriculum on BookTube, and there's this idea that, like, I'm not a real reader if I'm not reading this many books per month, if I'm
Yeah.
not in on all the discussions, if I'm not joining all the read-alongs, and if I'm not doing this kind of thing for my community, whatever it is, there's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of a hidden curriculum message that
Yeah.
places a lot of emphasis on the what I'm reading and how much I'm reading.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's really sad because, honestly, well, and I feel like the canon kind of fits into that too. There's kind of the booktube fan canon, right? There's the series that if you want to be a real fantasy fan, you have to have read this, 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 and this, which most of us have just kind of rolled our eyes at for most of the time we've been on booktube. But you do get comments about, well, I haven't read Lord of the Rings yet, and especially being as massive of a fan of the original Red Rising trilogy as I am, but I haven't read the next three yet. I've been
Mhm.
holding off on that because I'm just holding on to that experience of those original three books, because it was just such an incredibly impactful series for me. Well, how can you be a Red Rising fan if you've only read the first three? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there's just a lot of that kind of stuff. And I think, you know what? Nobody else gets to decide what kind of a fan you are or what you need to read or any of that. And I think that's an important thing that takes a little bit of time, I think, for some booktubers as they're kind of getting their channel going and you're trying to get into the algorithm a little bit and, be in the circles and meet people. And it can be hard not to feel that pressure.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. It's funny that you bring this up too, because on a slightly related topic to that, I've actually been questioning myself as a fantasy fan and just thinking about fandoms in general, because I feel like, for example, with the Song of Ice and Fire, I
Mm-hmm.
love that series. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's very meaningful to me for many reasons. I love what Martin does with it. I could appreciate it on so many different levels, and at the same time, I feel like I'm the worst A Song of Ice and Fire fan because I don't read all the Reddit stuff. I don't
Yeah.
know all the theories. I had a discussion on A Dance with Dragons this last weekend, and Kyle from Read by Kyle, bless his heart, he's like, "Well, you know the conspiracy theory behind this, or you know what's happening here, or you know this." I'm like, I
I
don't."
don't.
And he just told me, he kind of just gave me all of the history, all of the connections, which was fun to hear in conversation,
Yeah.
but I just don't have the mental bandwidth or interest in digging that stuff up. Same with
Yeah.
Molasses and Book of the Fallen. I did when I was reading that series listen to the 10 very big the 10 very big book podcast, can't say it now, for books 3 and 4, and then it was fine, it was good. It's a great podcast, but I fell off of it because I was like,
Mhm.
"This is a lot of extra time just listening and trying to absorb the story through a podcast after
Yeah.
taking so much time absorbing the story just with my eyes or ears." If I was listening, I did immersion for books 3
Okay.
on, but I just decided, like, I'd rather just absorb the story on my own. Like, I'd rather
Mhm.
just after a while, process it on my own. And
Yep.
yeah, sure, every once in a long while, if I forgot who a character was, I might look it up just to get a quick background or whatever. But I
Mhm.
didn't like go there and study the wiki or read all the PowerPoint slides. I still haven't heard about what those are. But like there's so many resources and I think it's
Yeah.
great. I think it's wonderful. All the resources like Sanderson, Cosmere fandom, all the Cosmere implications and all that stuff. It's
Mhm.
so fun for people, and I'm not
Yep.
trying to, like, stomp on anybody's parade who enjoys that stuff, but I feel like almost like a fantasy fan fraud because I just don't care.
Well, I think, maybe we are because I'm very much the same way, and I read like 13 Brandon Sanderson books in 2021, and just the amount of Cosmere resources that exist is mind-blowing by itself. And I think I value and honor my own personal experience with series enough that I don't need anything outside of that. Sometimes I'll dip into it because it's fun and
Yeah.
I like knowing what other people's perspectives are. And I love listening to other people talk about my favorite books because it's just fun, you know? Um, but there's not a need for, well, I don't have to have this to-do list of things added on top of my personal experience. That's just kind of icing on the cake.
Yes, exactly what you said, and it's like, if it's fun that's the big thing too. I'm like, if it's fun for you, please do it, but please don't feel like you have to be a fan. Please feel like you don't have to, like, do all that extra homework.
Right.
Yeah,
AP, great point. If books bring you joy, if rereading makes you happy, that is the important thing. We all have enough work reading. Yep.
yeah. But like
Totally.
what you said too about the book discussions, like for example, your Fellison video is one of my favorite videos actually
Thank
on
you.
Malazan. Yeah, because you made this wonderful connection between two different books on a certain
Mm,
theme, on certain passages that I hadn't seen or hadn't thought of. And that is so enriching to me. I'm like, oh, that
yeah.
is so cool. For me, I don't know. That's the kind of thing that brings me joy. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
same. And I think that's part of building the community and friendships within the community where we all kind of, we want to know what each of us thinks about. I like going to Johanna's channel and finding out her thoughts on Malazan because it's going to be something I hadn't thought of. And then I like going over and, listening to Philip talk about Malazan because it's going to be something else that I hadn't thought of. And it's fun to get all of those different perspectives on the same series because we all bring our own personal experiences into it and then we can see what someone else's personal experience was, and that's cool.
yes, yes. I
Yeah,
love that. I love that.
same.
Hmm.
um, Daniel says, I think there are a lot of fantasy fans who are not interested in going that deep down rabbit holes. There are many levels on which to enjoy most of our favorite books. Totally agree.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why when people say, oh, like, if you didn't love this, and this kind of goes back to a little bit what we were talking about before, but this series is best on a reread. That's
Mm.
an instant nope for me because I'm like, okay, I can appreciate. I've reread my favorite books many times, and I can see the that you just can continually layer your experience. But if you can't get a wonderful whole experience out of your first time going through a series, that's a pretty massive red flag for me.
So here's the thing. I've reread so many favorite books this year. I've reread so many books. I reread this A Song of Ice and Fire series. I reread Midnight Tides, book 5, in a song in Malazan.
Hmm.
I reread so many different books this last year, and I don't think this is going to be the most controversial hot take. I don't think there's a single book that I loved more on reread than I did the first time. Now,
Nice.
that said, it's a different kind of love. It's
It's a
like you
different
said, it's a layered
experience.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love rereading so much because I keep adding those layers and I keep seeing
Yeah.
those things. And it also brings me back to the emotions I had the first time. But the emotions I had the first time were really, really, really strong.
Yep.
So I also disagree with that idea.
Yeah. Well, I think, having read Gardens of the Moon this year for the second time, and there was a 10-year gap between my reads of Gardens, that was really interesting to me because I had forgotten so much of the characters and what actually happens in the story. Like I had the general kind of vibes still in my head, but that was about it. And I was so confused by it the first time I read it. And going back through and reading it again, I was kind of like, I had to sit and think about why I wasn't as confused about it the second time, because it wasn't that I remembered everything because I had forgotten almost. Like I was like, oh my gosh, like Ralik Nam is a character.
Yeah.
How could I have forgotten about him and Marilia? I loved those two and rereading it.
Yeah. I feel like I've already forgotten.
Right. But what was crazy about that was it wasn't so much that I credited it being a reread as I did my grown experience in the genre. That to me was the big difference between the first time I read it, which was it was literally the first book I read in the epic fantasy genre outside of Mistborn. So that's a pretty massive jump when you're brand new to epic fantasy. And I didn't find it confusing the second time around. And I think a lot of that is just because I've read so much more fantasy at this point that I'm just not as blindsided by a lot of it now. So
No, I totally see what you mean. Absolutely, absolutely. Malazan's an interesting one too because
yeah.
it feels almost like learning a language in a way. Like you read it and you semi understand it, and then
Mm-hmm.
you read it again, and you have a new context. Like you get the
Yeah.
context the more you read. So rereading is definitely a smoother experience, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Like even
Yep.
like if you finish book 10 and then go back to just read the prologue of Gardens of the Moon.
I plan
It's
on it.
weird. It's weird. It's almost to me, it felt like reading something that was fuzzy with new glasses. That was
Yeah.
kind of what it felt like, but I still loved Gardens of the Moon the first time.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
still, like, one of my favorite books. So, yeah, it's a different kind of experience. But I don't know if I agree with the whole, like, you have to read it twice kind of thing, or you
No.
have to
I
reread
mean,
something to appreciate it. I'm not
I th-
sure. Not
I
sure I
think
experienced that.
I think I could have picked up and kept going in Malazan, and I really
Mhm.
struggled
You
back
could
and
have.
forth whether or not I should do that. But I think part of it was just me wanting to re-experience Dead House Gates, to be honest.
Yeah.
And the arcs that I see between Dead House Gates and House of Chains, I were so impactful for me the first time. I really wanted to see how that 10 years later had changed. But I'm taking it very slow. Like I'm not. I didn't want to jump on a read along for Malazan because I knew that was going to absolutely kill my desire to read it. Just because I would feel so much pressure again to keep up with a certain schedule, or so yeah, I'm like 50 pages into Dead House Gates, have been for the last month, and I'm just fine with that. Like it's on my bedside table. I pick it up a little bit at a time, and I'm loving it.
Yay, that's exactly the way it should be. I
Yeah.
I don't regret at all that I kind of did a solo journey with the series, and I
I think
found
that's
friends
really
along the
smart.
way, and that was
Exactly.
the
And
cool
that's the
thing.
important part, right?
Yeah. I did actually, for me personally, I know Philip and AP were buddy reading it together on a reread during the time I was reading it, and so
Mhm.
I did actually consciously try to stay just a book ahead of them because I was so afraid that I would, like, watch one of their videos and parrot what they said, and I didn't wanna do that. I was like, "I really wanna have my own thoughts."
Yeah, yeah.
So that was the only thing, but it was wonderful. It was wonderful following their journey and then, like, hearing other people's journeys, getting to know more friends, so that's
Yeah.
fantastic
So
that way.
talking about wanting to have your own experience with it, when you've read a book, do you avoid watching any other commentary on it before you've done your own book review or written review or talked about it yourself for that reason? Do you feel like you want to have be able to articulate your own opinions about it first?
Ah, that's such a good question. So I used to be like that. I used to avoid watching any other reviews or anything before doing my own review. And sometimes it just happens that I just don't get around to watching other reviews before I do my review. It just kind of works out that way.
Yeah.
But I've stopped doing that for a couple of reasons. One is because I actually did a video discussion on my channel a couple of years ago, and it was about why we review. And Philip was in that discussion, if he's still in the chat.
Hmm.
And he said that I think AP was in that discussion too. And AP said, why do you review? Like, what is the purpose of your review? Who is your intended audience? Like, and I know that Philip said that he reviews to add to the discussion. That's what he said. And I
Yeah.
thought about that answer. It's just stayed with me. And I think if we're going to add to a discussion, shouldn't we be a little informed on what the discussion actually is, And so it
Yeah.
seems a little strange to me that we don't watch other reviews or know what the discussion is. And then we're trying to enter a discussion when we don't know what the discussion is.
Yeah.
So I guess I started to think about it and I was like, well, of course, I think the fear is nobody wants to be parroting what other people are saying. And
Right.
you want to be careful about that, or that you're not
Right.
letting your other people's thoughts or feelings influence your own feelings. So I try to be very careful that I am clear on what I'm thinking and feeling about the book before watching reviews after finishing the book. But I don't feel as much fear about that anymore because I feel like I don't know if this is like that for you, but I feel like the more I read, the more certainty I feel about
Yes.
what I'm feeling about the book.
Yep.
Or yeah. So I feel like I'm getting stronger about that. There are some books that are still a little ambiguous for me, but for the most part, I feel pretty grounded in what I'm thinking and feeling. So I don't feel like it's going to derail me to watch another person's review.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, to me, that's kind of a parallel of the writing process. You start by kind of a mimicry, right? And you start to work on, well, I really like what this author and this author do, and how do I translate that into my own voice? And you kind of have this little bit where you sort of stumble along and you try to figure out how to make it your own. And then as you go, you gain that confidence in your own voice. And you're like, nope, I don't need to lean as heavily on those influences anymore. They're still there, but I'm now, kind of bringing my own take to things.
That's like
and I
the
feel like
perfect.
BookTube is like that too, a little bit.
Yes, that's the perfect analogy. So I think to me, not watching reviews, if you're going to do a review, is the same thing as like a writer avoiding reading because they're afraid it's going to rub off on their writing. Like
Yeah.
I don't think that you have to. I think that you could still develop that voice and it can make sense for
Yeah.
a while, like you said, while you're
Yeah.
still trying to develop it. But I
Yeah.
think there comes a time when you can let those voices in and
Well, I
still kind of
mean,
hold ground for
if
yourself.
I look back at, so Bloodstones is the 10 years later book version of a world that I started back in college, right after I read Malazan for the first time. So the influence of Erikson on me as kind of catalysting my epic fantasy career is obviously very much there. And going back and reading the first manuscript I ever wrote in this world, you can see the Malazan influence in it, which I love. I love that I can see it when I read the story. And it's not that I'm copying anything. It's just you can tell what I was reading at the time. And 10 years later, that growth and confidence in myself and my own voice, like the influence is still there. If people ask me who my influences are as a writer, Erikson's going to be on that list. But now I'm able to take that influence and I can make it my own. And it's such a cool thing to be able to see the growth between, your first BookTube video to now, or your first novel in a world 10 years later to now. It's cool it's cool to be able to see that growth.
Yeah. Yeah. I envy some people on BookTube too, because I feel like for me, it's taken a while for me to even figure out my own voice on my own channel.
Yep.
I can totally sympathize with that too. Some people, they start their channels and I'm like, wow, you already have like your voice.
I know.
I'm
I
so
feel like I
impressed.
was a hot mess when I started
Me
my
too. Well,
channel.
I'm like persimmons and Japanese sweet potatoes.
Hey, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't think I've ever tried a persimmon. Now I want one.
They're so good. It's like the one redeeming quality of the winter because it's a winter fruit. Yeah.
There you go.
Well, you have to have them
Nice.
ripe enough though. If they're not ripe, then they're very tart or like they give you that mouth numbing. It's so bad. So you have to make sure
Ooh.
they're very, very ripe.
kind of like a mango. If it's not ripe, it's not great.
Yeah, exactly. They're so
Yeah.
good though. Yeah.
Jimmy says, I rarely watch reviews now. I still love book reviews. I know they've kind of gotten a bad rap lately because the people don't seem to be watching them as much. I'm glad that everybody still does them, to be honest, because I really enjoy watching them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Matt's just going to copy you if he starts a channel.
Oh, all right. I can't wait to see what that's like. Yeah.
Right? We're going to need some glasses and a wig and a persimmon, you know?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah, I like reviews too.
Yeah.
I know people talk about how they don't get as much views or whatever, but I still see a place for them as
Well, and I
well.
see a lot of longevity in those videos too, because, you know, I watch Malazan reviews from a decade ago, 5 years ago. You know, it's fun to go back and see how they've changed and what topics come up more now versus 5 years ago, 2 years ago, even. Like, I had no idea Fellison was such a hated character. I had no idea until I came to BookTube.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I was like, wait, what? And that was one of the reasons why I did the video, because I was like, I had no idea that that was such a controversial topic and character. Well, I got to wade into this conversation now.
Yeah. Well, and the nice thing, like you said, about the evergreen part of that is that, like, for me, I feel as a content reviewer, the more reviews you have behind you, like, the lazier you can be in some videos. Because, like, for example, the video I put out today, I was like, I have a review for that. I have a review for that. I want to hear more thoughts. So I don't have to, like, talk for 20 minutes about this book.
Yes.
It makes me feel like I have something to lead on a little bit.
Well, and that, I think, is something that is very algorithm friendly, if we want to go that far, because I think a lot of people want the quick, like, should I read this book? Should I not? And when you can say, here's my like 2-sentence thing, and if you want more thoughts, go to, you know, that's a really good layered way of getting people, you know, to stick around on the video.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I hope so. I don't know.
I guess. I would think.
I think I mean, if nothing else, I think reviewing, it helps you to, it's a skill. I think it's actually a skill, like you said, like learning how to articulate your thoughts about a book. You can get that skill probably through writing reviews, but also just talking about books.
Yep.
Skill.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I prefer, surprisingly, I think well, maybe not. I prefer writing down, like, I prefer writing out my Goodreads reviews. When I get to the video reviews, I always feel like I'm non-coherent somehow. Like, I'm just sort of rambling.
You're not non-coherent.
So I have a harder time. I edit my review videos more than probably any other video on my channel, because I have to stop and start so many times. But yeah, it's like, nope, but I still want to do them because I want to be able to say, here's my thoughts on what I've read, because it's important to me to be able to voice those out into the internet void.
Yeah. Do you find there's any specific thing about a review that appeals to you when you watch reviews?
I like when people tie in their personal experience. When I watch a review that's just someone kind of repeating what the book is about, I click off pretty fast. But if it's someone getting really passionate about a theme or a character or something within the book that really spoke to them personally, I love that. Because that's seeing someone else's perspective, right? So yeah, when it's more personal like that, I really like it.
Yeah. I bet that's meaningful to you as a writer too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Observations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's funny. If my earliest reviews, I feel like were so short. And part of one reason that I think they were short was because, and maybe still are short compared to some reviews, is because I just I couldn't be bothered to go into detail about the plot and what the story's about.
Same.
And part of it is because when I watch reviews where people go on and on about like a plot summary, I tune out. I tune out every time.
Well, they can read the back of the book.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Or the Goodreads blurb or the Amazon blurb. So yeah, it's not, I don't really feel like that's what a book review should be for per se. But yeah.
But I have been trying to get better about it, because I think that is a skill too, to briefly summarize what the book's about.
That's one of my biggest things about actually writing too, because, you know, now that Bloodstones is getting close to, I have like a month left. But the back blurb, I was like, I would rather write another 150,000 word book than write this back blurb. I hate it. Like, I hate trying to
Wow.
figure out how to condense this big epic fantasy story into like 2 paragraphs.
No,
It's
I
such a
can
skill
totally
set.
understand that. I could
Ugh,
totally understand that. Yeah, because it
yeah.
feels very reductive for all the work
Yeah.
that you put into it and what you're
Yeah.
really trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
and
I
that's where
totally
it
get that.
helps to have a group of writers around you that you can panic and reach out to and say, "Please help me write this."
Oh, yeah. I can imagine that being very difficult. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's Yep, they're so hard.
Sounds hard. Yeah.
I I get a little snarky at the beginning when I realize it's time for me to write the back blurb, and I get kind of irritable about it and snarky, and I'm just like, "Hey, if I wanted to summarize my book in 2 paragraphs, I would have written a 2-paragraph long book."
Yeah.
I just want to put RAFO on the back of
Yeah.
my book.
No, I would be the same way. I would be the same way. And by the way,
Yeah.
Philip, your blurbs are excellent. I feel like they're so clear, and books have a lot of world building in them. There's a lot going on, but
His
I thought the blurbs were very, very,
his
very
books are
good.
incredibly polished, which is beautiful. I love
Mhm.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, they are.
And that's something as a note for anybody who maybe has a hard time with book reviews or like doing them or writing back blurbs if you're an author. Study the books on your shelf. Like, pull some books down, especially ones that you've really enjoyed. Read the back blurbs and just kind of think through how they're laying it out and what points they're making about the story, what's important to bring out from from the plot and the characters. um, Watch some book reviews and the ones that you like, and figure out like how much time did this person spend on the plot summary, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think a lot of the blurbs I can think of, that I thought were pretty good are usually pretty concise, and they're usually just kind of hinting at how the story starts, just the
Yep.
initial setup. That's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Poof.
That's gotta be even harder. Yeah.
Yep.
I don't even know
uh,
if I like 3-word pitches, honestly.
I like the list. I would love to list just words or tropes. Like with phased, I love being able to just say werewolves, mental illness, like
Oh,
like
yeah.
going through that.
Yeah.
Here's what you're going to find in the book. That's so much easier than trying to string it into nicely sounding sentences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense, though. Yeah.
Charles Dickens, I'd have written you a shorter letter if I'd had more time. Yep. I feel that.
That's so well said. It's hard to
I
be
already
concise
did,
sometimes.
Sarah. I have a working back blurb now.
Yeah.
But, well, so there's a couple other questions I want to get to really quickly, because I asked these lovely people for these questions, so I want to make sure I get to them. So we've had AP and Janny Wirtz so far. You're a reviewer that is great at identifying themes in books. Have you always been good at picking up on this, or is that a skill you've developed the more you have read?
Oh, wow. I love that question.
Isn't it great?
Yeah, yeah. Well, my interest in theme oddly has to do with like my academic writing in the past.
Mm.
I don't want to go too much into that because I don't feel like I'm the best academic writer by any means, but I know that like some of the research I've done before has had to do with like finding emergent themes in a
Ah,
study, for
okay.
example. And I
Yeah.
always loved that process. I always loved looking for themes,
Kind of a
even just like
treasure
in
hunt.
yeah, it is. It's like a
Yeah.
treasure hunt. And so I've always loved that process and making connections. Like you were talking about parallels, loved doing that with like case studies, with like qualitative case studies. So that was a skill I think I had kind of refined in a nonfiction way before
Yeah.
starting a channel. And then I never really thought about themes, honestly, when it came to reading fiction. Like, I know that sounds weird, but I had a terrible English background, so I didn't really know anything about prose. I didn't know anything about literature or how to evaluate literature, and I'm still learning. I'm still learning a lot about that topic. It's actually a
Yeah.
topic I'm pretty fascinated by right now. But I once I started hearing people like Philip and Alan, for example, talk a lot about themes whenever they would
Mm.
talk about their reviews, I immediately grabbed onto that. Or even when I heard, Patrick does this sometimes in his
Yeah.
reviews. He'll
Mhm.
bring forth a question. He'll present the theme as a question, and I love that. It's a technique
Yep.
I've kind of strived for as well. And so I don't know, that's something that I've just gravitated towards, and I think like you, I think I also really love those parallels in stories and
Yeah.
just seeing those connecting features and seeing the universal aspects of what the author is bringing forth. So I think, yeah, it's a passion. It's kind of like a passion I think I naturally had in a way.
Yeah. I can imagine that would be really helpful when you're already used to kind of pulling themes and looking for that specifically, that would be really helpful in fantasy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm also an avid I talked to you about this in the past. I've also been an avid journal writer for most of my
Mm.
life. And I
Mhm.
found when I was journaling a lot that my daily journal entries would kind of have somewhat of a narrative approach without me even trying to do that. It kind of felt like it had a build and it came to a closure at the end without me really trying. I felt like a
Yeah.
lot of my journal entries were like that. So I think there was something that was keeping the glue together in a way, like, because keeping things together.
Yeah.
So maybe I don't know, maybe my mind naturally works that way too, to some
Yeah.
extent.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I agree with Philip. I would also love to hear more about your academic work at some point. And I had forgotten, we've talked about this before, that you're also a singer.
Oh, man. Hiding now, blushing.
So if we ever meet up, we'll have to do a duet as a YouTube short and
Oh,
throw it on.
okay. Man, I'm not it's funny because man, I'm not performing. I haven't performed in a long time, but I do teach singing and I
Cool.
sing all day, like all the time. In fact, I've been worried about my voice or I've been worried about my dog because I think my dog, she's quite a bit older now, and
Oh
I think
no.
she's starting to show signs of deafness. And I'm like, man, maybe I need to stop singing to her because I will like operatically seeing these, like, arpeggio scales at her, like, on the daily, and my husband's like, "You are loud," and I'm like, "Oh, man," because it's a little echoey in our house too. So I'm like, "Oh, I need to, like, back off," but I sing all the time, but I'm really shy about, like,
Are you
performing.
an alto or soprano?
Uh, I that's a really
Or
complicated
something in
question.
between? I know there's a lot of
Yeah. No, no,
versions of
no.
both of those.
Why the reason it's complicated is because growing up, I was always put as like alto 2. I was
Sure.
always put in the lowest voice parts. Even in middle school, I sang tenor at one point, which is stupid. That was a dumb choice on my teacher's part. But I always thought I was a low voice singer because I always had a strong chest voice and I could sing the harmonies pretty well down in the lower range. But it wasn't until after graduate school that I met one of my best friends who is a vocal genius. He's a former opera singer. I need to bring him on my channel sometime. I love that guy.
Should.
Yeah, but he came up to me the first time I met him, hadn't heard me sing, and he said, "What are you? What voice type are you?" And I said, "Well, we don't know," like, meaning my voice teacher at the time. "We think I'm a mezzo soprano, which is the lower type,
Mhm.
but we don't know." And he said, "Can I feel your vocal folds or your can I feel your throat?" And I said, "What? Okay."
Sure.
So he came up and he put his hands on my larynx, and if you put your hand on your thyroid notch, that's like your Adam's apple, and you try
Yeah.
to find the other side of your larynx, and then you can get kind of an estimation of how long your vocal folds are.
Huh.
And what determines your voice type is the length of your folds. The longer the vocal folds, the lower pitch the voice. And that's just one factor. The other factor is how thick the vocal folds are, which we
Huh.
can't really tell, obviously, but we can
Right.
kind of get a little bit of an estimate. So he was like, "You are either a midget mezzo soprano." He's like, "There's no way you're a mezzo soprano." And he's like, "You're a soprano." And sure enough, he started training me and he did help me get into my higher extension. Unfortunately, I've never been able to be very good at it, and I think I just trained incorrectly for so many years that I've
Mm.
always had to struggle with that, but yeah, it's been a complicated journey for me, but it's something that yeah, I love vocal pedagogy, though. I love the science of acoustics. I'm a big nerd about that stuff. Don't
You
get me
realize
started.
you're gonna have to do a video or something now where you do a little concert for your
Oh,
audience.
no. Ah, so
Yep.
funny. It's so funny. Mm.
See, it's funny because I have talked to a couple of other people on BookTube that also sing. That would be awesome to do a BookTube choir. That'd be super cool.
Oh, that sounds fun.
It would be very
Cool.
fun. Well, now I'm questioning everything about I have no idea, because I started as a first soprano in college, which I know for sure I am not.
Ah,
um, and I just kind of slowly worked my way down. And then after I had my son, my senior year of college, I've been singing between second soprano and first alto most of the time, and I'm more comfortable with alto. But now I'm like questioning everything, and like maybe I'm something I don't even know.
yeah, you could be a mezzo soprano, it's hard to tell, and
Yeah,
depending on the voice type, the voice can like, it can not develop until the mid-30s sometimes,
right.
so it takes time sometimes.
Yeah,
So, generally, the lighter and higher the instrument, generally speaking, the faster it'll develop,
yeah,
but the more like, the bigger the instrument, that takes a long time to develop.
yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
Gruffet, not much of a singer, but I do play viola. Nice. I play violin.
Oh, fantastic.
Do you
That's cool.
play any instruments?
I do not, no, but I
Okay. Well,
love the
your
violin and
voice.
viola. Yeah. The voice, yeah,
Yeah.
but it's funny because I really love the violin.
Mm.
Joshua Bell is one of my favorite. Do you know who that is? He's a famous
I've
violinist.
heard the name. Yeah, yeah.
Ah, he has a whole record called Voice of the Violin, and it's
Yes.
all a bunch of, like,
That
opera songs or vocal
yeah.
songs that are just him playing on the violin, and I love them better on the violin than sung. So, like, Song to the Moon from the opera Rusalka, absolutely
Mhm.
stunning when Joshua Bell plays it. It's so
I
beautiful. Mm.
have not heard that for a very long time, but as soon as you mentioned the name of it, I was like, "Oh my gosh, yep, I've heard that."
Oh, it's so good. It's such a
Yeah.
good CD. Mm.
Yeah, it is. Um, well, I'm gonna have to have you back on just for a music. We'll have to have Josh from Red Fury Books join us, and we'll just have
Yeah.
a musical chat.
Sure.
um, okay, so here's another question. I've two more, three more, but two of them are very short. As an assassin elf, you must be an expert with a bow, long dagger, throwing stars, etc. What is your favorite weapon to dispatch your victims with? Also, would you take a contract to deal with a pesky dragon? It is of critical importance on this particular, as this particular reptile is a dangerous nemesis.
If it wasn't obvious from the first few words who was asking the question, that
You
is
have
so
no idea, right?
no, no, Philip,
No.
I have no idea. Um,
What would be your
uh,
assassin weapon of choice?
um, I guess I don't know. I so I used to be a LARPer. I've talked about this with Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads when I was in high school. This is really
Mm-hmm.
kind of embarrassing now. That's a live
I
action
love
role
that.
player. Yeah, and so my favorite thing to do was to play sword and shield because I'm really tiny. I'm a really short person, so I could hide really well behind a shield. I have a picture. I should get it out or something. And I could
Yes.
swing around with my sword and I run around the field and like hit people with the sword and run and then hide. And I had so much fun with that. It was such a blast. So I don't know if that would be very effective against critical dragons, but but
A
that's my
shield,
answer.
a shield wouldn't be a bad thing to grab,
Oh,
I
that's
suppose.
true.
Yeah, I would
Fireballs. Mhm.
exactly. So, if it's a solid wood shield, you might have issues.
That's a good point.
Right? There's all these, she's a singer and a LARPer and loves persimmons and potatoes. Like,
Yep, that's me.
we're finding out all of the tea this evening.
Find it all out. It's all out there.
Okay, here's another one that I'm pretty sure you won't get at all who this is from. Why won't you read KJ Parker?
Ugh, no. I know who this is. Oh, well, I
Mm,
think I do. It could be somebody else, but I
mm-hmm,
know who
mm-hmm,
because a certain person wants me to read KJ
mm-hmm.
Parker. And I like making this person mad by never reading the books that he wants me to read.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, because, I just never read any books that that
No,
person recommends.
nobody does.
Nobody
Nobody
does.
does.
That's right.
Which is, what's hilarious about that? I got a book in the mail today. Do you know what it is?
Oh, cool.
So like, no, but nobody reads
No,
KJ
nobody reads
Parker.
that.
No,
By the way, that is a cool cover. I love the
isn't it?
cover of that. Yes.
I You know, this is another one where I feel like I'm at a point with, you know, what I'm starting to be able to read more of, that I'm actually really excited to get into KJ Parker now, because I feel like, again, I'm at a point in my reading journey where I'm going to be a lot more open to the style of storytelling that I gather he uses. And this one sounds like a fun time, like a siege in a city and
Yeah.
like a really close in focus of that. I'm here for that. Let's go.
Yay. Fantastic. Will that be your first KJ Parker book?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool.
Which apparently it's one of the only ones that the unnamed person has not read.
Really? And
Yes.
is it a series?
I don't think so. I think it is this. Don't quote me on that.
Okay.
Somebody in the audience knows. Is 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City?
Because that might be the reason that person hasn't read it.
I think.
Oh, it is a series. Evie has confirmed.
Okay, well.
I was going to say Evie could have been the one maybe to ask that question, if not the other person. But it was obviously the other person.
It was, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Who asked the theme question, by the way?
Oh, did I not mention that? That was Josh from Red Fury Books.
Aw.
Yeah.
That's so nice of him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought I mentioned that. Sorry, no, Josh.
It's okay. No, yeah.
And then the last one, which is another one that I'm pretty sure you will guess right away, is on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad did it suck getting hit by a moving vehicle?
Yeah, I know who the... It sucked. It was so scary. It was like a horror film. It was like a horror film.
What person is going to be like 5 out of 5 stars would definitely recommend? You know?
Yeah. Well,
that doesn't sound like
that
a fun
person
experience.
Likes having us cripples on his show sometimes. So
that's really kind of him, you know.
You know, he likes to contrast how big and strong he is. So no, it sucked. It was scary. Yeah, I didn't get. So I don't remember exactly how he framed the question. Was it
getting hit by a moving vehicle?
Yeah, so I didn't really get hit by the car. What happened was I was sitting on the hood. If anybody needs to hear this, do you mind if I share the story? I feel bad because
no, go ahead. We have twice. I only have a few boundaries on this channel of things we don't talk about, and you haven't touched any of them. So
okay, cool. I just feel because I know I've told you the story before, but
go for it.
But what happened was I was 14 years old, had a crazy wild week because my parents were out of town, and I was sitting. My friends came over. I had some friends, a girl, her brother who drove the car, and another girl and another guy. There were a few friends that came over. Anyway, the guy who drove the car, which was this big boat of a station wagon, parked it in my front yard. And we were just having a relaxed night. I was actually trying not to get in trouble that night because my parents were on their way home from their trip. And I was sitting on the hood of the station wagon with another friend sitting on there, just having a chat. You know, it was parked. Then the guy who brought the car sits in the driver's seat. His sister sits next to him in the passenger seat. He starts the car with us sitting on the hood and starts laughing at us. And we're like, ha ha, that's not funny, whatever. So we just keep talking, roll our eyes, try to ignore him. He starts to move the car with us sitting on the hood. And right away, we were freaked out. Because yes, I get it. If you're driving like 5 to 10 miles per hour, when you're in the car, that's really, really slow. But when you're sitting on the hood,
it's not as slow.
It's not slow. I started screaming. We were yelling at him. We're like, stop the car. Stop. And he felt like he was in control. So he was like, ha ha ha. And his sister was laughing like, woo, you know. And they started going around the block. The girl I was on the hood with, she was a bit of a bigger girl. And so she was able to brace her weight a little bit better than me. But he stopped at one point. He was turning a corner at one point. I almost slipped off right then. And she caught me by the wrist.
Oh my gosh.
And then we went almost around the whole block, just yelling at him, please stop the car. Please stop the car. Please stop the car. He stopped the car. I flew and I landed in front of the car on my elbow. And I remember I scraped my elbow and forehead somehow. And I was laying on the ground and I looked back and he started the car again, not knowing my legs were in the path. And so I watched the front wheel, and this was a boat of a station wagon, y'all.
Oh.
I watched the front wheel go over the calf of my right leg and the knee of my left leg. And I was screaming, and they stopped the car at that point, just when the first wheel went over. Fortunately, it was just one wheel, but I was screaming. They're like, "What's wrong?" And I said, "You just ran over my legs." And they said, "No, no." I'm like, "No, no, I saw it." They're like, "No, Joanna, this is a 2 or 3-ton station wagon. If we ran over your legs, you would be so crushed." I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. I saw it." And right then, all chaos ensued. Like, I guess the neighbors called the cops. There was a neighbor who came. He's like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. Nothing's wrong. I fell. Everything's fine." So I stood up and I tried to walk, and it was not happening.
Oh, I
So
bet.
my friend, who was not in the car at all, he came along and he picked me up and he carried me inside. And right then, everything happened at once. Like, the cops came, and ambulance came. My parents got home from Spain.
Oh my gosh.
I was in so much trouble. It was awful. But I was very lucky. I only got a hairline fracture in my kneecap, which swelled to
Ooh.
the size of a bowling ball.
Oh, I
And my
bet.
other muscles like shriveled up from atrophy. And I had to go to physical therapy to be able to like bend my knee again and build the muscles back. And I healed really, really fast, but it was excruciating.
Oh,
So
I
yeah, 10
bet.
out of 10. Woo.
Would totally recommend. 5 stars on Goodreads.
Yeah, 5 stars.
Yikes.
Yeah,
You
it was
know, that's
awful.
fair. That's awful.
Yeah, it was a crazy time in my life. I used to like joke that that was the time when a teenager learns that maybe they're not immortal. That was
Right?
my one brush with like, oh wow, I'm not immortal, even though I'm a teenager.
Yeah. Well, that's such a real thing though, because I
No,
remember
yeah,
being in high school and yeah, I was convinced I was going to live forever and I was totally invincible. And I, was a total daredevil. I had horses and I had a tire swing that went out over this big, like 10, 15-foot drop. And I'd do, it's like, yeah, it's fine.
cool.
Now
That's
I'm
kind of
like,
cool. You had a tire swing that went over a wow.
yeah, that was pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we all
Yeah.
hit that wall at some point and we realize, oh, I am mortal, actually.
Yeah, 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 it's pretty crazy. It was a crazy time. I got made fun of a lot. And back then, they did not prescribe the painkillers. I feel like if that had happened to me nowadays, they probably would have given me like, what is it, Vicodin or
Yeah.
all types of painkillers. They only gave me Tylenol. I only had Tylenol for that pain, and it was excruciating. But
Yeah.
I built a really high pain tolerance, I guess.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, I suppose is a one star plus 1 star.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, I can't even imagine. Well, there you go. Not to name any names, but Jimmy, there's your answer to the question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never been struck by a moving vehicle, so I'm sorry that you had that experience because that sounds
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah. Well, Alan, his experience was definitely it sounded even worse, but yeah, some
Yeah.
friend commonalities here.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully you guys can connect on some better
Better
shared
better things, more
experiences
positive things.
in the
Yeah.
future.
Maybe
So
KJ Parker, who knows?
there you go. There you go. If you ever read him,
If I ever, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you all night because I know that your pumpkin hour is swiftly approaching. But really quickly, do you want to do a speed round of Save One, Drop One?
We'll try. What does that mean? Save one, drop
So
one.
I'm going to pull 2 pieces of paper. Each one of these has either a series or a book written on it. You have to pick one to save and one to drop forever.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'll try my best. Ooh, this is gonna
I love doing this with, oh my goodness. Okay.
Just know that my answers might change.
That's fair.
5
That's
minutes
totally
from now.
fair.
Okay.
I feel that.
Yeah.
Okay, The Road by Cormac McCarthy.
I haven't read it.
You haven't read it? I thought for sure. Okay, hold on. Pick a different one. I have a couple other.
I've read a few other McCarthy books, but not The Road, oddly. I know I need to.
Dark Tower.
Okay.
Versus Augustus by John Williams.
So pick one, drop one?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pick Augustus.
To save?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
That's crazy. I can't believe I chose that.
I'm really nervous about my top 10 books this year. I have no idea how that one's going to be on it for sure. But okay, Age of Madness by Joe Abercrombie or Shogun by James Clavell.
Age of Madness.
That's what I figured you were going to pick.
Love Shogun, especially the ending, but Age of Madness. Chef's kiss.
Thank you, Daniel, for that clarification. I appreciate it.
No.
She does. She has to get rid of all of her copies. And
oh, man.
I'm kidding. Okay. Dune versus Vinland Saga.
Which one I would drop?
Or
I would save Dune.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I feel like these are making it easy for you so far.
Yeah, they're not too hard so far. I'm surprised.
Okay, I don't know if this one's going to be hard for you either. Farseer.
Okay.
Malazan.
I would drop Farseer. Yeah.
Evie is having a conniption in the chat. I don't know if that was poorly timed, Evie.
I know. She's gonna drop me as a friend now. Oh no.
Okay. This one I know you've read, Cormac McCarthy, All the Pretty Horses.
Yes, I have. Mm-hmm.
Versus Long Price Quartet.
Oh wow. So I might surprise you with this one. I would pick which one I would drop or which one I would pick. I'm sorry.
Either or.
So the one I would pick is going to be All the Pretty Horses.
Okay.
Yeah.
More Long Price Quartet for me, it's fine. The only Cormac McCarthy I have ever read was The Road. Okay. And I was a brand new mother when I read it, which was probably not the right time for me to read that.
Oh, yeah. So. Yeah. There are certain books that you should not read as a brand new mother.
That's
Pet Sematary being one, by the way, which I just recently
don't know. I have a hard time with horror in general. So Pet Sematary is one that I know I need to stay very far away from.
Yeah, stay away from that one.
Evie.
Oh, that's so mean.
Whoops. Okay. Warlord Chronicles or Stoner by John Williams.
I'm dropping Warlord Chronicles. Stoner is one of my favorite books of all time. Yeah.
I love it. Love it.
I love Warlord Chronicles. That's crazy. I know. Good thing he doesn't watch that. He's not watching this. He's streaming at the same time, right?
Yeah. Yes, he is. That's probably why he's not here to heckle you. Okay.
Revenge.
I don't know if this one's going to be hard for you either. Prince of Nothing by R. Scott Baker. Game of Thrones by George R. R. Martin.
I'm going to pick a Game of Thrones.
Okay.
Even though I love Prince of Nothing. But yeah, A Song of Ice and Fire is just...
So if you want to know Joanna's actual favorite books,
oh yeah,
I have them right here. Save and drop one. There you go. I feel like sometimes the jar is really good at giving good pairings, and sometimes it's just very easy the whole way through. I feel like none of those were too hard on you.
No, but they might have surprised some people. You know, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Jimmy is acting surprised in the chat.
I want to know, are you surprised, Jimmy? I don't think you're surprised, are you? And he called me a dude bro. Yeah, well, I am a dude bro, I guess.
We have to be on Fantasy BookTube. Are you kidding me? If we're not a little dude bro.
That's true. Yeah.
Like, the minority without beards over here that, representing the estrogen of BookTube.
Exactly. In our corner especially.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think all of us have a little dude bro.
Yeah.
That's why I didn't fit in with the YA fantasy crowd, to be honest. I was a little too dude bro for them.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I feel like you and I have that in common. I think, have we talked about that before? About like we were the type of girls who ended up having more guy friends.
We weren't like the other girls.
We weren't like the other girls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which weirdly is actually kind of true in this case.
Yeah.
I was always way more comfortable around my guy friends because most of the girls I met, and thankfully I have so many wonderful female friends now from BookTube. I love all you guys. But back in high school, girls were just so complicated and catty, and I was like, that's just not me.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Absolutely. Oh wow. You need to join the Dude Bro group. Dude Bro?
Is that one of the requirements? I have to have read Stoner?
Yeah, well,
I
It
better
kind
get
of
on
relates
that.
back to the last Chatting with Nuts episode if you want to check that out.
Okay, I'll go watch.
Watch at your own risk, but
Okay. Oh,
yeah,
now I'm even more
apparently
intrigued.
Jimmy's guest on that one pretty much confirmed that in order to love Stoner, you have to be a dude bro, even though I was like, I loved Stoner. Hello.
Oh. Well,
So
that just proves your dude bro status then.
there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Honorary
So
dude bro. Mhm.
love it. I always joke that I need to get one of those crochet beards that I can throw on for live streams, because I have been in so many live streams where it's, 4 of us or whatever, and everybody but me has a beard. So I'm like, I need a crochet beard for
Oh,
these
that's
live
so
streams.
funny. That is so funny. Oh my goodness. You should do it.
You guys, I'm going to literally, after we're done, I'm going to go and check out this Chatting with Nuts episode, because now I got to know.
Yeah.
The FOMO.
It was a good episode though. It was a good
Yeah,
episode. And it
it
does get
sounds
more
good.
positive as we go along, as it always does there at the Fantasy Network.
We love that.
Yes.
Well, Johanna, thank you so much for sharing your time tonight and coming on for the chat. It has been very long in coming. We've been trying to set this up for a while, and I'm glad that it finally worked out.
Same here. Thank you so much, Tori. I love talking to you. As anybody could see in our Why Read episode, which I think is the longest Why Read episode I have.
This is one of my longest Motley Crue episodes.
Oh, so. I'm honored. I'm super
honored. We're just on fire here.
Yeah, and I love the Motley Crue Chats series.
Thank you.
An honor to be here. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, everybody who, if you, for one strange reason or another, have not already subscribed to Johanna's channel, you need to go down in my description box and click the link over to her channel and hit subscribe. Check out some of her videos. See if you can find the persimmon video. It'll make it a treasure hunt.
Skip that one. Maybe I should try it now.
Right? I know. I don't even want to know. I don't even want to go back to my first videos. We're not going to talk about it. But thank you guys in the chat for hanging out with us. Philip, you heard it here first, folks. Thank you for everybody in the chat for joining us, and we will see you all on the next episode. Bye, everybody.